The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of downtown Phoenix as Captain Marcus Rodriguez crouched behind an overturned police cruiser, his weathered hands gripping a modified assault rifle. The silence was deceptive, broken only by the distant groans that had become humanity's new soundtrack. It had been exactly 47 days since the outbreak began, 47 days since the world changed forever. What started as isolated incidents in remote laboratories had spread like wildfire across continents, turning neighbors into nightmares and cities into graveyards. Marcus pressed his radio transmitter, speaking in hushed tones to his scattered team. "Alpha Team, this is Command. Status report." Static crackled before Lieutenant Emma Patterson's voice emerged from the chaos. "We've got eyes on the target building, sir. The pharmacy is crawling with at least 30 hostiles, maybe more in the basement levels." Marcus closed his eyes, calculating their dwindling supplies against the medicine they desperately needed for the survivors back at Haven Base, a fortified shopping mall that had become their sanctuary. The transformation had been swift and merciless. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, once a respected virologist, had watched helplessly as her colleagues succumbed to the virus she had tried so desperately to contain. Now, hidden in the underground research facility beneath the city, she worked frantically alongside her assistant, Jake Thompson, racing against time to develop a cure. Their latest batch of experimental serum glowed pale blue in the laboratory's emergency lighting, representing humanity's last hope wrapped in a fragile glass vial. Above ground, the infected roamed in increasing numbers. These weren't the slow, shambling creatures of old horror movies. The virus had evolved, creating predators that retained fragments of human intelligence while gaining supernatural strength and speed. They hunted in packs, communicated through guttural sounds, and worst of all, they were learning. Marcus had witnessed them setting traps, using tools, and even exhibiting what appeared to be strategic planning. The supply run had been planned for weeks. Haven Base's medical supplies were critically low, and without antibiotics, even minor injuries could prove fatal. Marcus's team consisted of his most trusted fighters: Emma Patterson, a former Army medic whose steady hands had saved countless lives; Danny Brooks, a young but skilled marksman who never missed his target; and Maria Gonzalez, an ex-police officer whose knowledge of the city's layout had kept them alive more times than he could count. As they moved through the debris-strewn streets, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The infected had grown smarter, more patient. They no longer simply charged at the first sign of human activity. They observed, they waited, they planned. The pharmacy stood 3 blocks away, its broken windows and bullet-riddled walls telling the story of previous failed attempts by other survivor groups. "Movement at 2 o'clock, Danny whispered through his scope. "Looks like a scout. These things are definitely organizing." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Intelligence gathering was a human trait, and seeing it in the infected confirmed his worst fears about the virus's evolution. The creatures were becoming more than mindless predators. They were becoming something new, something that threatened to replace humanity entirely. Back at Haven Base, civilian leader Amanda Foster tried to maintain order among the 87 survivors who called the fortified mall home. Food rationing had become stricter and tensions were rising. Some wanted to venture out in search of other survivor groups, while others believed their only chance was to remain hidden until rescue arrived. Amanda knew the truth that Marcus hadn't shared with everyone: there would be no rescue. The government had fallen, the military was scattered, and they were truly on their own. The pharmacy mission wasn't just about medicine, it was about proving that humanity could still fight back, could still reclaim their world from the monsters that had taken it. Marcus checked his watch. 0800 hours. They had a 6-hour window before the infected became more active in the afternoon heat. The plan was simple but dangerous: create a distraction at the building's rear entrance while a smaller team infiltrated through the roof access. As they prepared to move, Marcus caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Across the street, partially hidden behind a burned-out car, stood an infected that looked almost human. It wore the tattered remains of a business suit, its face bearing only minor decay, and its eyes held an intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through him. This wasn't just another mindless zombie, this was something evolving, something that understood tactics and strategy. The creature turned and disappeared into the shadows, but Marcus knew it hadn't fled. It had gone to gather reinforcements. The hunt was about to begin, and for the first time since the outbreak, Marcus wondered if they were the predators or the prey. The morning air hung thick with tension as Marcus signaled his team to move forward. The pharmacy loomed ahead, its shattered windows reflecting the harsh sunlight like broken teeth. What they couldn't see was the carefully orchestrated trap waiting inside, The intelligent infected had learned to use human tactics against their former species. The creature in the business suit had indeed gathered reinforcements, and now over 50 infected waited in strategic positions throughout the three-story building. Danny Brooks took point, his sniper rifle scanning the upper windows for movement. "I'm not seeing any obvious hostiles, but something feels off," he whispered into his radio. The silence was unnatural, even for a world where silence often meant death. Maria Gonzalez crouched beside an abandoned ambulance, her police training screaming warnings that her conscious mind couldn't quite articulate. The infected had learned patience, and patience was perhaps the most dangerous weapon they could have acquired. Emma Patterson checked her medical kit one final time, knowing that in minutes she might be treating wounds that would determine who lived and who died. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of responsibility. Back at Haven Base, children were developing fevers that simple antibiotics could cure, but without those medicines, their small bodies were losing the battle against infection. The first phase of their plan involved Danny creating a distraction at the pharmacy's rear loading dock while Marcus, Emma, and Maria entered through the roof access. The building's layout showed a clear path to the pharmacy section on the ground floor, but intelligence meant nothing when the enemy could think and adapt. As Danny moved into position, he spotted movement in the building's upper windows, too coordinated to be random, too purposeful to be coincidental. "Command, we've got a problem," Danny reported. "These things are positioned like they're expecting us. This isn't random wandering, this is an ambush." Marcus felt his blood chill. If the infected could set traps, humanity's tactical advantages were rapidly disappearing. Still, the children back at base couldn't wait for better circumstances. The explosion Danny triggered at the rear of the building was meant to draw the infected away from the main pharmacy area. Instead, it served as a signal for the creatures to spring their trap. As Marcus's team descended from the roof, infected burst from concealment points throughout the building's interior. These weren't the mindless creatures from the early days. They moved with purpose, cutting off escape routes and herding the humans toward predetermined kill zones. Emma found herself separated from the group when a section of the floor collapsed during the initial chaos. She crashed through into the pharmacy's basement level, her medical bags scattered but her rifle still functional. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and maintenance corridors, and she could hear the infected moving above her with disturbing coordination. Her radio crackled with static as she tried to contact Marcus, but the building's structure was interfering with their communications. Above ground, Marcus and Maria fought back-to-back against waves of infected that seemed to understand military tactics. They used cover effectively, flanked the humans' positions, and even retreated when taking casualties, behavior that suggested they valued their own survival over mindless aggression. "They're learning from us," Maria shouted over the gunfire. "Every move we make, they're adapting to counter it." Danny, positioned outside as overwatch, found himself under attack from infected that had climbed onto adjacent rooftops. His sniper position, carefully chosen for its defensive advantages, was being systematically compromised by creatures that had observed human military tactics and learned to exploit their weaknesses. He was forced to abandon his post and fight his way toward the pharmacy, his carefully planned support role dissolving into desperate survival. In the basement, Emma discovered something that made her blood run cold. Medical files scattered throughout the storage area showed that this pharmacy had been one of the first places to report unusual symptoms in the days before the outbreak. Patient records described behavioral changes, increased aggression, and physical mutations that matched the infected's current state. More disturbing were the dates. The infection had been spreading for weeks before anyone realized what was happening. The infected in the basement were different from those above. They moved more quietly, seemed more focused, and their attacks were precisely calculated rather than frenzied. Emma realized she was facing the next stage of evolution, creatures that had learned to hunt like humans rather than animals. Her medical training told her these weren't just infected anymore. They were becoming something entirely new. As ammunition ran low and the infected pressed their advantage, Marcus made a desperate decision. Rather than retreating empty-handed, he ordered his team to fight their way to the pharmacy section and grab whatever supplies they could carry. The medicine was their only hope, and leaving without it meant condemning the survivors at Haven Base to slow death from treatable conditions. The battle raged for 3 hours with both sides taking heavy casualties. But as the smoke cleared and the team finally escaped with precious medical supplies, Marcus realized they had won a battle while losing something far more important: their tactical superiority. The infected were no longer just surviving, they were evolving into humanity's replacement. 3 levels beneath the crumbling city streets, Dr. Rebecca Morrison's hands shook as she stared at the data streaming across her computer screen. The underground research facility had become her prison and sanctuary, its reinforced walls the only thing standing between her small team and the chaos above. Jake Thompson, her research assistant, looked up from his microscope with eyes that held a mixture of excitement and terror. "Rebecca, you need to see this," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the facility's humming generators. The breakthrough had come at 0347 hours, during their 16th consecutive day of round-the-clock research. The viral samples they'd been analyzing revealed a structure too complex, too precisely engineered to be natural. Every protein sequence, every genetic marker pointed to one horrifying conclusion: the virus hadn't evolved naturally or emerged from some remote jungle. It had been created in a laboratory, designed as the ultimate biological weapon, and someone had deliberately released it into the world. "Look at these genetic markers," Jake said, pointing to the holographic display that showed the virus's molecular structure. "These aren't random mutations. This is deliberate engineering. Someone wanted to create something that could adapt, learn, and eventually replace human consciousness while maintaining the body's basic functions." Rebecca felt her stomach drop as the implications hit her. This wasn't just an outbreak, it was an orchestrated extinction event. Meanwhile, 15 miles away at Haven Base, Marcus's team limped through the reinforced entrance carrying their hard-won medical supplies. Danny Brooks supported a wounded Maria Gonzalez, her left arm hanging useless from a deep bite wound that had barely missed major arteries. The pharmacy mission had been a tactical victory, but the cost was becoming clear. Emma Patterson worked frantically to treat Maria's wounds while trying to process what she'd discovered in the basement files. The infection was spreading weeks before anyone reported it, Emma told Marcus as she cleaned Maria's wound. Those medical records showed patients exhibiting symptoms as early as 6 weeks ago, but they were being treated for psychiatric conditions, not infections. Marcus clenched his jaw, realizing that the official timeline was a lie. Someone had known about the outbreak and covered it up, allowing it to spread while authorities remained ignorant. Amanda Foster gathered the survivors in the mall's old food court, now converted into their meeting hall. The 87 faces that looked back at her were tired, frightened, and beginning to lose hope. Children clung to their parents, elderly survivors struggled with limited medical care, and the able-bodied adults were running out of reasons to keep fighting. "We've retrieved enough antibiotics to treat the sick," Amanda announced, trying to inject optimism into her voice. "But we need to talk about our long-term survival." The debate that followed revealed the growing divisions within their group. Robert Mitchell, a former construction foreman, argued for abandoning the mall and searching for other survivor communities. "We're sitting ducks here," he insisted. "Those things are getting smarter, more organized. It's only a matter of time before they find a way in." Others, led by elderly teacher Helen Rodriguez, believed their best chance lay in fortifying their position and waiting for government rescue operations. Back in the underground facility, Dr. Morrison and Jake made another disturbing discovery. The virus contained kill switches, genetic sequences that could potentially be activated to stop the infection spread. But these switches were encrypted, requiring specific knowledge that only the virus's creators would possess. Someone designed this as a controllable weapon, Rebecca realized. They have the power to end this pandemic whenever they choose. The facility's security monitors showed increasing infected activity in the tunnels above them. The creatures had learned to follow scent trails and were systematically exploring the underground infrastructure. Jake pulled up building schematics on his tablet, showing Rebecca the maze of service tunnels that connected to their laboratory. "They're not just wandering down here," he said grimly. "They're searching for something specific." As if summoned by their fears, the facility's motion sensors began triggering in sequence, showing multiple contacts moving through the upper tunnel system. The infected weren't just randomly exploring, they were conducting a coordinated search pattern. Rebecca quickly began backing up their research data to encrypted drives, knowing that their work might be humanity's only hope for survival. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission from Marcus. "Dr. Morrison, this is Captain Rodriguez. We need to know if you're making progress on that cure. Our situation is deteriorating rapidly." Rebecca looked at Jake, both of them understanding the weight of expectations resting on their shoulders. The cure was theoretically possible, but they needed time they might not have. Above ground, the infected were evolving faster than anyone had predicted. They had learned to coordinate attacks, use tools, and most terrifyingly, they were beginning to remember fragments of their human lives. The war for humanity's survival was entering a new phase, one where the lines between predator and prey were becoming increasingly blurred. The discovery came at dawn, when Amanda Foster found Thomas Brennan sitting alone in the mall's old electronics store, staring at his reflection in a broken television screen. His eyes held a clarity that should have been impossible. Thomas had been bitten 3 days ago during a supply run, and by all accounts, he should have turned into one of the infected by now. Instead, he sat there fully conscious, speaking in complete sentences, but with veins that pulsed black beneath his pale skin. "I can hear them," Thomas whispered to Amanda, his voice carrying an otherworldly quality that made her skin crawl. "The infected. They're not just mindless creatures anymore. They have thoughts, memories, plans. And Amanda." He turned to look at her with eyes that flickered between human intelligence and something far more alien. "They're coming for us tonight. All of them." Marcus arrived within minutes of Amanda's urgent radio call, his weapon drawn but uncertain whether he was facing a threat or a miracle. Thomas Brennan had been a trusted member of their community, a former paramedic who had saved lives during the early days of the outbreak. Now he sat before them as something that defied everything they thought they knew about the infection. "How long have you been like this?" Marcus demanded, his finger hovering over the trigger. Thomas smiled, an expression that seemed both human and predatory. "Since the bite. I felt the change happening, but somehow I held on to myself. I can feel the virus in my blood trying to take control, but part of me is still human. I'm caught between two worlds." Dr. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio from her underground facility. "If what you're describing is true, Thomas could be the key to developing a cure. His blood might contain antibodies that are fighting the infection while allowing him to maintain consciousness. You need to bring him to me immediately." The survivors gathered in the food court erupted into chaos when the news spread. Helen Rodriguez, the elderly teacher, stood on a table demanding Thomas's immediate execution. "He's infected," she screamed. "He's going to turn and kill us all in our sleep." Others rallied behind Robert Mitchell, who saw Thomas as their potential salvation. "If he can resist the infection, maybe we can learn from him. Maybe we can find a way to save everyone who's been bitten." Emma Patterson approached Thomas cautiously, her medical training overriding her fear. "Thomas, I need to examine you. Can you tell me what you're experiencing?" His response chilled her to the bone. "I can feel their hunger, Emma. When I close my eyes, I see through their eyes. I know where they are, what they're planning. There's a massive horde gathering in the industrial district, thousands of them, all working together like soldiers in an army. The infected had evolved beyond individual hunters into a collective intelligence, and Thomas had become an unwilling bridge between the two species. As night fell, his warnings proved terrifyingly accurate. The mall's perimeter alarms began triggering in sequence, not from random attacks but from coordinated probes testing their defenses. The infected were conducting reconnaissance, learning their security patterns and searching for weaknesses. Jake Thompson monitored the situation from the underground facility, his equipment picking up unusual electromagnetic patterns. "Rebecca, I'm detecting organized radio transmissions from the infected. They're not just communicating, they're coordinating a military-style operation." The creatures had learned to use human technology, turning their victims' knowledge against the survivors. Thomas's condition deteriorated as the night progressed. His human consciousness began slipping away for longer periods, replaced by something that spoke in the infected's guttural language. During these episodes, he would describe the horde's attack plan in disturbing detail, his eyes rolled back and black veins spreading across his face like a web. "They know about the underground facility," Thomas gasped during a moment of clarity. "They're going to attack both locations simultaneously. They want the doctor's research and they want to eliminate the survivors who might spread knowledge of their weaknesses." Amanda realized with growing horror that the infected weren't just trying to feed or expand their numbers, they were conducting a strategic campaign to eliminate threats to their species. Marcus made the hardest decision of his life. Despite the moral arguments raging around him, he knew Thomas was too valuable to sacrifice and too dangerous to trust completely. "We're going to use him as our early warning system," he announced to the assembled survivors. "But he remains under constant guard, and at the first sign that he's losing control, we end this." The infected began their assault at 0200 hours, attacking with tactics that would have impressed human military strategists. They used explosives to breach the mall's outer defenses, employed decoys to draw defenders away from key positions, and coordinated their attacks to maximize casualties while minimizing their own losses. Thomas screamed in agony as his consciousness was pulled between human loyalty and infected instinct, his body becoming a battlefield between two species fighting for the future of Earth. The explosions shattered the pre-dawn silence as coordinated charges detonated across Haven Base's outer perimeter. Marcus watched in horror as the infected poured through the breaches like a well-trained military unit, their movements precise and calculated. These weren't the mindless creatures from the early days. They carried improvised weapons, used hand signals to communicate, and advanced under covering fire from infected who had learned to operate human firearms with deadly accuracy. All units, fall back to secondary positions. Marcus shouted into his radio, but the infected had anticipated their defensive strategy. They had studied the survivors' tactics during previous encounters, learning to counter every move before it was made. Danny Brooks found his sniper position under attack from multiple angles as infected scaled the mall's exterior walls with climbing equipment scavenged from sporting goods stores. In the underground facility, Dr. Morrison felt the building shake as explosions echoed through the ventilation system. Her research was at a critical stage. The cure was theoretically complete, but she needed Thomas Brennan's unique blood to synthesize the final component. "Jake, we need to get to the surface," she said, frantically downloading their research onto portable drives. "If we lose this data, humanity loses its only chance." The infected had learned to exploit human psychology as well as human tactics. They used the voices of loved ones to lure survivors from cover, mimicking the speech patterns of people who had died weeks ago. Helen Rodriguez broke from her position when she heard her deceased husband's voice calling from the darkness, only to find herself face to face with an infected that had somehow retained fragments of human memory. Thomas Brennan writhed in agony as the assault intensified, his consciousness being pulled between human loyalty and the infected's collective will. Through his connection to the Horde, he could see the battle from both perspectives: the desperate courage of the survivors and the cold efficiency of the infected's coordinated attack. "They're not just trying to kill us," he gasped to Emma Patterson, who was treating his worsening condition. "They're harvesting. They want to convert the strongest survivors, not eliminate them." The mall's food court became a fortress as survivors barricaded themselves behind overturned tables and makeshift barriers. Amanda Foster coordinated the civilian evacuation while Marcus and his team held the line against wave after wave of infected. But their ammunition was running low, and the infected seemed to have an unlimited supply of reinforcements streaming in from across the city. Maria Gonzalez, still recovering from her pharmacy wounds, took position at a strategic choke point near the old anchor store. Her police training had taught her to read crowd dynamics, and what she saw terrified her. The infected weren't just attacking, they were herding the survivors toward specific areas, cutting off escape routes and forcing them into predetermined kill zones where capture would be easier than elimination. The infected had learned to use human technology against its creators. They activated the mall's fire suppression system, flooding defensive positions with foam and smoke that provided perfect cover for their assault. Emergency lighting flickered and died as they systematically disabled the electrical systems, plunging sections of the complex into darkness where they held the advantage. Robert Mitchell led a desperate counterattack toward the main entrance, hoping to break through the infected lines and establish an escape route. His construction knowledge had helped fortify Haven Base, but now he watched those same defenses being systematically dismantled by creatures that had learned to use human tools and tactics. The infected employed sledgehammers, crowbars, and cutting torches with the precision of trained engineers. Dr. Morrison and Jake fought their way through the underground tunnels as infected poured into the research facility. The creatures moved with purpose through the complex, heading directly for the laboratory where humanity's last hope lay stored in refrigerated samples. "They know exactly what we've been working on," Jake realized with growing horror. "Someone or something is directing them to our research." The battle reached its climax when a massive infected, one that had clearly been a bodybuilder or soldier before the transformation, broke through the survivors' final defensive line. It moved with intelligence and strategy, using smaller infected as shields while advancing toward the civilian shelters. Marcus emptied his clip into the creature, but it barely slowed its advance. Emma Patterson made a desperate choice that would haunt her forever. As the infected overwhelmed their position, she used the last of their precious medical supplies to create improvised explosive devices, turning healing instruments into weapons of destruction. The explosion eliminated dozens of infected but also destroyed medicine that could have saved human lives. As dawn broke over the devastated mall, the survivors realized they had lost more than just their sanctuary. Helen Rodriguez lay dead, torn apart while trying to reach her husband's voice. Danny Brooks was missing, last seen fighting hand-to-hand combat with infected that had overrun his position. The infected had achieved their objective. They had broken humanity's will to resist while capturing valuable resources and strategic intelligence about human defensive capabilities. The remnants of Haven Base's survivors huddled in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath the city, their numbers reduced to 37 souls clinging to hope in the darkness. Marcus counted their remaining ammunition, less than 200 rounds between all of them. Emma Patterson worked by flashlight to treat the wounded, her medical supplies nearly exhausted after the devastating assault. The infected had achieved their goal. Humanity was broken, scattered, and running out of time. 3 miles away, in the depths of her compromised laboratory, Dr. Rebecca Morrison stared at the vial of pale blue serum that represented months of desperate research. The cure was complete, but its creation had revealed a terrible truth. The antidote required a specific enzyme found only in the blood of someone who had been infected but retained human consciousness. Someone exactly like Thomas Brennan. "The process will kill him," Jake Thompson said quietly, his voice echoing in the damaged facility. "We need to extract nearly a pint of his blood and process it through the viral synthesizer. His body won't survive the procedure." Morrison felt the weight of playing God, choosing who lived and who died in humanity's final hour. Thomas was their only hope, but saving the species meant sacrificing the individual who had bridged both worlds. Above ground, the infected had established what could only be described as a military command structure. They occupied key buildings throughout the city, posted sentries at strategic locations, and conducted regular patrols with the efficiency of trained soldiers. More disturbing was their apparent ability to learn from human broadcasts. They had somehow accessed radio communications and were using human tactical knowledge against the survivors. Thomas Brennan's condition had deteriorated rapidly since the assault. His moments of human consciousness were becoming shorter and less frequent, replaced by episodes where he spoke in the infected's guttural language and his eyes rolled back to reveal only whites. During these transformations, he would describe the infected's plans in chilling detail, revealing their systematic approach to hunting down the remaining survivor groups scattered across the city. "They're not just trying to eliminate us," Thomas gasped during one of his lucid moments. "They're studying us. Every attack, every encounter, they're learning how humans think, how we react under pressure, how we organize our defenses. They're preparing for something bigger than just taking over one city." Amanda Foster struggled to maintain order among the demoralized survivors. Children cried for parents who would never return, adults stared blankly at walls, and the elderly simply waited for death to take them. The subway tunnels that had once represented safety now felt like a tomb, their concrete walls echoing with the distant sounds of the infected moving through the city above. Maria Gonzalez, despite her injuries, had become their intelligence gatherer. Using her knowledge of the city's layout, she ventured into the tunnel system to monitor infected movements and search for other survivor groups. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The infected weren't just occupying the city randomly. They had established a perimeter around the subway system, methodically searching every tunnel and maintenance shaft. They knew exactly where the survivors were hiding. Dr. Morrison made contact with Marcus through their encrypted radio channel. "Captain, I need to speak with Thomas immediately. The cure is ready, but I need his consent for what comes next." When Marcus explained the situation to Thomas during one of his conscious moments, the former paramedic's response was immediate and resolute. "Doctor, I've been dead since the moment I was bitten. If my death can save humanity, then let's get this done." The ethical debate that followed nearly tore the remaining survivors apart. Emma Patterson, bound by her medical oath to do no harm, argued against using Thomas as a sacrifice. "There has to be another way," she insisted. "We can't just murder someone to save ourselves." But Robert Mitchell, who had lost his entire family in the assault, saw no alternative. "He's going to die anyway. At least this way his death means something." Jake worked frantically to prepare the extraction equipment while Morrison began the delicate process of synthesizing the cure. The procedure required precise timing. Thomas's blood had to be processed while he was still conscious enough to provide consent, but infected enough to carry the necessary enzymes. Too early and the cure wouldn't work. Too late and Thomas would lose his humanity entirely. The infected seemed to sense something was happening. Their patrols became more aggressive, their searches more systematic. Thomas, in his final moments of clarity, looked at Morrison with eyes that held both fear and determination. "Doctor, promise me something. When this is over, when humanity survives, remember that we were all human once. Even the infected, they were people with families, dreams, hopes. Don't let hatred consume what we're trying to save." As the extraction began, Thomas Brennan closed his eyes for the last time, his sacrifice about to determine whether humanity would see another dawn or fade into extinction. Thomas Brennan's body lay still on the makeshift operating table as Dr. Morrison held the vial containing humanity's last hope. The cure existed, but in quantities that could treat perhaps a dozen people. The moral weight of choosing who lived and who died pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Outside the damaged laboratory, the infected had tightened their perimeter, their organized patrols closing in with methodical precision. "We need to reach the Meridian Pharmaceutical Facility," Morrison explained to Marcus over the encrypted radio. "It's the only place with the equipment to mass-produce the cure. But it's 15 miles through infected territory, and they'll know we're coming." The facility represented their only chance to save not just the survivors in the tunnels, but potentially reverse the entire pandemic that had consumed the world. Marcus studied the city map with grim determination. The route to Meridian required crossing 3 major infected strongholds, including the downtown area where the creatures had established what appeared to be a breeding facility. Intel from Maria's reconnaissance suggested the infected were doing more than just surviving. They were reproducing, creating new generations that were born infected but retained higher cognitive functions. Emma Patterson volunteered for the mission despite her exhaustion. "I'm the only one with the medical knowledge to assist Dr. Morrison if something goes wrong with the synthesis process," she argued. The team would be minimal: Marcus, Emma, Morrison, Jake, and surprisingly Maria Gonzalez, who insisted her injuries wouldn't slow them down. The remaining survivors would hold the tunnel position under Amanda Foster's leadership. The journey began at dawn, when the infected were traditionally less active. Moving through the abandoned subway maintenance tunnels, the team encountered evidence of the infected's growing intelligence. They had learned to set traps in human pathways, using motion sensors and tripwires with the sophistication of trained engineers. More disturbing were the anatomical diagrams scratched into tunnel walls, crude but accurate drawings showing human vulnerabilities and optimal bite locations. Jake carried the precious cure samples in a temperature-controlled container, knowing that if they were lost, Thomas's sacrifice would be meaningless. As they emerged from the tunnels into the industrial district, they discovered the infected had transformed the area into something resembling a military base. Watchtowers made from scavenged materials stood at regular intervals, and infected sentries moved in coordinated patterns that would have impressed human military strategists. The Meridian facility loomed ahead, its glass and steel structure intact but surrounded by infected that seemed to understand its importance. "They're not just guarding it randomly," Morrison observed. "They know what we're trying to do." The infected had learned to anticipate human objectives, turning their tactical knowledge against their former species with devastating effectiveness. Marcus devised a desperate plan. They would create multiple diversions using their remaining explosives, drawing the infected away from the facility while a smaller team infiltrated the building. Emma and Morrison would access the production lab while Marcus, Jake, and Maria held the perimeter. It was a suicide mission with slim chances of success, but the alternative was extinction. The first diversion worked perfectly, drawing hundreds of infected toward a series of explosions in the warehouse district. But as the team approached the facility, they discovered the infected's most terrifying evolution yet. They had learned to sacrifice some of their numbers for strategic advantage. The diversions had been partially ignored, leaving a substantial force guarding the pharmaceutical plant. Inside the facility, Morrison and Emma worked frantically to adapt the production equipment for cure synthesis. The process was complex, requiring precise temperature controls and sterile conditions that were difficult to maintain in a damaged building. Every minute that passed brought them closer to breakthrough, but also closer to discovery as the infected systematically searched the building. Jake's voice crackled through their radio. "We've got movement on all floors. They're not just searching, they're herding us toward the production lab. It's like they want us to complete the cure." The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. The infected weren't trying to stop them, they were allowing the cure to be produced for reasons that defied human understanding. The truth became clear when they reached the production floor. Danny Brooks stood waiting for them, but his eyes held the same black-veined appearance as the infected. He had been captured during the Haven base assault and transformed, but like Thomas, he retained human consciousness while gaining access to the infected's collective intelligence. "They don't want to stop the cure," Danny explained, his voice carrying an otherworldly quality. "They want to control it. The infected aren't trying to eliminate humanity, they're trying to create a new species that combines human intelligence with infected resilience. The cure isn't meant to save us from them. It's meant to evolve us into them." As the production machines hummed to life, synthesizing gallons of the cure that could save or damn the human race, Morrison realized they had walked into the ultimate trap. The infected hadn't been fighting to destroy humanity, they had been guiding them toward this moment, where the cure would become the final step in their planned evolution. The production facility hummed with mechanical precision as gallons of the cure flowed through the synthesis chambers, each drop representing the potential salvation or damnation of the human race. Dr. Morrison stood frozen before the control panel, her finger hovering over the distribution switch that would release the cure into the city's water supply. Danny Brooks watched her with eyes that held both human compassion and infected calculation, his transformed state serving as a preview of humanity's possible future. "You have a choice," Danny said, his voice carrying the weight of the infected collective. "Distribute the cure and evolve with us into something greater than either species alone, or watch humanity slowly die as we gradually replace you through natural selection. Either way, the old world is ending. But with the cure we can build something new together." Marcus raised his weapon but hesitated. Danny had been his friend, his trusted sniper who had saved countless lives during their missions. Now he stood as the spokesperson for a species that had orchestrated humanity's potential extinction while offering them a path to survival that required abandoning everything that made them human. Through the facility's windows, they could see the infected gathering in massive numbers throughout the city. Not attacking, not hunting, but waiting. Thousands of creatures that had once been human stood in organized formations, their collective intelligence focused on this single moment when the future of Earth would be decided. They had learned patience, strategy, and most dangerously, hope. Emma Patterson examined the cure samples under the facility's electron microscope, her medical training allowing her to understand what Morrison had created. "It's not just a cure," she announced with growing horror. "It's a transformation catalyst. Anyone who takes this will gain the infected's physical advantages, enhanced strength, speed, resistance to disease, but they'll also become part of the collective consciousness. Individual human identity will be absorbed into something larger." Jake Thompson backed away from the production equipment, finally understanding the infected's long-term strategy. "They've been farming us," he whispered. "Every attack, every assault, every moment of apparent chaos, they were selecting for the strongest, smartest, most adaptable humans. They wanted to breed the best traits into their collective before offering us this choice." The radio crackled with Amanda Foster's voice from the tunnel hideout. "Dr. Morrison, we're seeing infected gathering at every entrance to the subway system. They're not attacking, but they're making it clear we can't leave. It's like they're waiting for something." The infected had positioned themselves to ensure the survivors couldn't escape the decision that would determine their species' fate. Morrison's hands shook as she realized the full scope of the infected's plan. The virus hadn't been a weapon designed to destroy humanity, it had been an evolutionary tool designed to uplift them. The original creators of the virus had intended to force human evolution, believing that natural selection was too slow for the challenges facing Earth. The infected weren't humanity's enemy, they were humanity's intended future. "The kill switch is in the virus," Morrison said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're not designed to stop the infection. They're designed to prevent anyone from reversing the transformation once it's complete. The original creators wanted to ensure their evolutionary experiment couldn't be undone." Marcus faced the hardest decision of his life. As a soldier, he had sworn to protect humanity, but what did that mean when humanity itself was being offered a chance to transcend its limitations? The infected had demonstrated superior coordination, enhanced physical abilities, and collective problem-solving that surpassed individual human intelligence. They had built a society in weeks that functioned more efficiently than human civilization had in centuries. Emma made the choice that would echo through history. Rather than allowing Morrison to activate the mass distribution system, she destroyed the control panel with a burst of gunfire. "If we're going to evolve, it has to be our choice," she declared. "Not theirs, not the virus creators, but ours. Each person gets to decide individually whether they want to take the cure and transform, or remain human and face whatever comes next." The infected's response was immediate but not violent. They began withdrawing from the city, their collective consciousness apparently accepting Emma's decision. Danny Brooks smiled, an expression that seemed both sad and hopeful. "The offer remains open," he said before joining the retreat. "When you're ready to move beyond the limitations of individual existence, we'll be waiting." As the sun rose over the devastated city, the 37 survivors emerged from their subway sanctuary to find themselves alone in a world that had been fundamentally changed. The infected had vanished into the wilderness, taking their collective knowledge and evolutionary advantages with them. Humanity had survived, but at the cost of watching their potential future walk away. Morrison sealed the remaining cure samples in a secure container, knowing that future generations would have to decide whether humanity's next evolutionary step would be voluntary or forced. The dawn of the new world had begun, but which species would inherit the Earth remained an open question that only time would answer.